Hello and welcome to GMBN Tech. Today we're back doing Ask GMBN Tech. We've picked out your questions you've submitted in YouTube comments, on Instagram, whatever channels you like. We'll look at some of them and pick out the questions for you. And the first one today, Owen is going to kick us off.
Yeah, well, it's not mine. It's Ravioli Townsend. It is, how important is riding the right size bike? And it's a short question, but I think the answer could be huge because there's so many
very
aspects
short,
of it.
It's very important.
Yeah, it is.
But why is that?
Why is it very important? Well, I guess the starting point is always that even on an e-bike, you're human powered. So unlike in a car where you can get one that might not fit and might not be more comfortable, but it's got a bigger engine, so you'll go faster. On a push bike, you've got to optimize your output and your wattage. And the best way of doing that is making sure your bike fit and the ergonomics of that bike fit can optimize that. I guess where it gets really interesting and exponentially more complex quite quickly is that as you kind of like play with bike fit, and there's lots of aspects, whether it be kind of like front center or chainstay length and all these different terms of like reach and stack and how slack a head angle is and all of these factors that influence the sort of the ride dynamics and how you as a rider change those dynamics as well, means that you can get into a puzzle very, very quickly. And I've seen it with racers who are, I would say, smaller of stature, riding XXL bikes because they find that centres their position. So they're compromising some of their ergonomics to maximise some of these alternative effects that you get from the rest of the bike. So it's yes is the easy answer, but then it kind of is exponential from there. I mean, what are your thoughts? Because you're a racer.
I am, but I tend to. I think it's interesting what you're talking about with the XXL bikes, because the typical problem you probably have with that if your bike is too long is it's going to be hard to get your weight over the back or over the front. Probably you're kind of stuck in the middle and it might be hard to control the bike. It's going to feel a bit vague. So then if they have worked up to that point, they're racing a really long bike, they're clearly like they've got to that level where they can throw themselves around a bit.
Yeah.
So it's like understanding each aspect of how a bike might not fit you, but whether you actually want those characteristics. And a lot of the people that are downsizing, that's for the mad extra maneuverability, and then that might be too much for me or like someone else who's not at that level. So it's sort of understanding how each bit of the bike size breaks down for you. And there's a lot of the ergonomics, I think, is probably the most important, because ultimately we spend most of our time pedaling, and you don't want to do yourself a mischief with the fit and everything like that.
And I guess when we talk about fit, we often people talk about reach, but the measurement in general originally came from the triathlon world, where the top tube dimension of a traditional road sizing didn't really work. So they started to introduce reach and stack, and reach is kind of self-explanatory. It's the length roughly of the front centre, thereabouts. And then the stack is how high the sort of head tube is. And again, you might want more top tube because you might have a shorter torso, for example, because the ratio of how your body goes together, not just overall height, can be a factor. But then that impacts how tall the head tube is. So if you're downsizing or you're deciding you're in between sizes, it's not just that reach perspective or measurement that you'd also need to look at is how high the bars are and how that affects you when you're riding technical terrain. Like
everything on the bike, like nothing's like a square or a straight line, is
Sadly
it? Because
not,
everything's on a diagonal, so you change one size and that moves everything else relative to it a lot, because you've got a diagonal foot, so you bring the handlebars up, you're going to bring them back.
Yep.
That's going to make the steering potentially a little bit more vague. You can't get over that front wheel, but then also if they're too low, you're going to maybe get a sore neck, wrist pain, because it's all a complicated mishmash of factors.
It's almost like someone should do a video just on this topic.
That's very true. Can you think of anyone that might be able to do that?
I feel like there will be a link in the comments below. But what are your bike tips in terms of getting the right size? What things have you learned, or what mistakes have you made? Have you ridden the XXL bike when you probably should have been on a medium? Let us know, Taylor. Okay, we've got another question now, and this one is from, I'm going to say Henrietta, 95. I'm looking to get a new 150 to 160 mil frame. Very specific, but very good. For, I guess, what you'd call enduro terrain, and wondering what the hallmarks of design would be for a bike that suits either air or coil. So they're interested in the advantages of both shocks, and if we've got experience of those. So air or coil? Is it as simple as just like I like one over the other?
Ultimately, probably yes.
Okay.
It boils down to what you like, and then you're going to have a good time on it and probably ride better. But within that, obviously, there are different characteristics of both systems, just sort of the general way that you like to ride, I think, and how you want your bike to handle, and then in combination with certain parameters on frame design that are quite limiting.
Okay, yeah.
I guess one of the main things with air shocks, and why they're very popular within people who spec bikes as well, is obviously the ability to adjust the air pressure and your sag, and you can tailor that almost infinitely, within the limits
reason.
within reason. You don't have to swap your steel spring out in order to set your sag. You can just pump it up.
And I guess there's the other factor with an air spring. There is natural progression in that spring, so it's not it doesn't compress at a linear rate. It actually ramps up, so it gets stiffer as it compresses.
Yeah.
So that can, I guess, aid sort of resistance to bottom out if you're on a longer travel bike as well.
And that's something that's built into the frame design, because obviously you have both the linear and progressive shocks, as you've spoken about, but that can link in with the leverage ratios of the actual frame design, which is how much the shock stroke is going to move relative to how much the back wheel moves. So obviously if that changes and the rear wheel is travelling more for the movement of the shock, that takes more force because it's... So, and then that obviously ramps up in bikes that are progressive, and that would suit a linear coil spring. So if you put an air shock on a progressive frame, that's going to be like super ramped up. And then in contrast, you've got a linear leverage curve on a linear coil shock. That's going to blow through travel really quickly and bottom out more easily. So that's the main thing, I think. Okay, so I guess you've got to look at, if you want to go for that coil, what are the benefits of a coil? Small bump sensitivity is the main one everyone talks about, I think, and that supple feeling of tracking the ground, and because you don't have the seals basically holding the air in, so you've just got slightly less stiction off the top of the stroke. So it's that initial thing where it just can track nice and easy. They tend to heat up a little bit less as well. So if you're slamming down a 30-minute alpine descent, the oil can heat up a lot and interfere with your damping and stuff like that, and an air shock. And I guess the air could heat up a bit too, so then that's going to change its damping characteristics. PV equals NRT. Ideal gas equations. So your pressure and volume are going to get messed around with the hot air. There we go. Useful. That's one of the main things. I guess the other issue is talk a little bit is if you have got like a long yoke mount on your shock, and you're getting those like shear forces on the shock. So they're kind of like in between these side loads. Air shock's a nice big stiff can. Slightly more adapted to that than a coil shock that could potentially... Because the shock shaft itself, rather it's stiff if you're twisting it or bending it sideways versus how like the spring force of compressing it. Obviously strong in compression, not in torsion. So you just can think about if your particular bike loads the shock in a particular way, that could suit an air shock. I feel like I've read some, maybe it's some common sales, maybe it's a YT, whereby because of the yoke design, they're recommending that, or maybe it's even certain brands of shock are saying that you can't run their shocks on these bikes because of that leverage. Another thing, I guess, is that the coil shocks tend to be slightly more, well, not reliable, but air shocks might need a little bit more servicing because the seals are just under more pressure, literally. So like with dirt and everything like that, it's really important for those to be clean. And the stickier they get, the less of that small bump sensitivity that you have, and your shock is already predisposed to be slightly less good than a coil. But it is, on average, going to be lighter. I mean, if you look at comparable shock designs within the same manufacturer, often it could be, a coil shock could be twice as heavy with a steel spring relative to a comparable intended use air shock. So that's a big thing on XC bikes, and that's why you tend to see, coil shocks on the big travel enduro downhill bikes. XC bikes got the air shocks. So I guess they've got to decide to a degree, like, do they want to optimise the weight savings of the bike, or are they happy to maximise the kind of suspension performance? Ability, and also, will the frame that they're looking to get at, this wonderful sort of enduro 150 to 160 frame, is it compatible with one to start with? So just look at a couple of questions first. Interesting. Well, get back to us. It'd be good to see. Thank you. Next question is from South Stokes Claude. What are the main reasons to buy a new bike over a used bike?
Well, new bike. Well, at the moment, there are lots of new bikes that are available at wild prices. So if you have got money to get a new bike, then yeah, there's potential to get an absolute bargain. However, it loops around to why one of the reasons why you'd get a new bike is that they would have warranty. And unfortunately, some of the bikes that we're seeing online on special at the moment probably won't have that warranty because unfortunately, some big things are happening to those businesses. But I guess the take-home points are with a new bike, it's all new. You get, in general, a warranty. It'll be most likely set up perfect for you. You're getting the right size, and it's only been sort of like fitted into a box. It's not been thrown around.
I guess that's it, because especially with carbon fibre, you can get a lot of damage that you can't really see until it's too late. You know, these like hidden cracks and fatigues and that kind of thing. And even if you're buying from the most trusted person in the world, you still don't really know what it's been through. And there's a lot of stuff you can't see internally in terms of if it's a full suspension or even with a front fork, you don't really know the condition of that unless you maybe got the suspension serviced, at which point you've probably already bought it. So it's just about those little cumulative wear and tear kind of things that you might not be able to see, but they are actually going to add up to be maybe prohibitively sort of impairing of how it rides.
Yeah, I mean, carbon can get repaired, so that's one factor. I mean, aluminium is, like you can see damage on alloy frames, like it does dent, whereas carbon fibre doesn't really dent.
Smushes.
It smushes, but it can get repaired. So, I mean, it depends on where the impact is, so it's not a complete write-off. But yeah, I guess the other factor is worn bearings, and that's not on wheels, on headsets and all of those. So if you're mindful about being able to know that you can get those replacement parts, it's an extra factor to put in.
Our esteemed GMBN Tech colleague Anna Cipulo has just actually put out a video on how to buy a second-hand bike if that is the route you choose to go down, and she runs through all the major considerations of just what you need to be aware of if you are in that market. Next up is a question from Matt Axenvarian, who says, I don't know how much of a faux pas this is, but he cleaned and prepped his bike without checking the weather, applied a dry lube, and then went about his business. By the time he came to ride the bike, the weather had changed, just applied wet lube straight on top of that dry lube, but a clean chain under that. Should they have removed the dry lube first?
I mean, it will depend on what dry chain, because there's quite a few dry chain lubes out there, but I would say most of them dry off by their very nature. I know they're a wet lube that you're applying, but if they've kind of like all the carrying agent has dried off and you're just left with a relatively dry chain, it should be fine.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the wax ones, maybe it's a bit different, but
I don't think so. I mean, I reached out to PEs about this as well, because they talk about that with their dry lubes and wet lubes, and then so any lube that's like a wax-based or water-based wax emulsion. So you use the water to set the wax on, that evaporates off and dries with the wax. To apply like an oil-based wet lube over that is actually completely fine. It's going when you're going the other way, like a spring cleaning style thing. So if you think about going from your wet lube to your dry lube, you need to actually clean the chain off, because otherwise you just sort of lock those oils over, everything's over the top. But that way around, that you should be absolutely no problem. Thanks for your comments and questions as ever. Keep us going on Ask GMBN Tech. What I'd love to know actually.
Ask GMBN Tech.
Hashtag Ask GMBN Tech. Something that's interesting, I think, is air versus coil. I mean, Rich and Neil did a video comparing that on one bike. So if you've ever had an experience of maybe changing a shock between the two on the same frame, let us know in the comments. That's something that would be educational for us.
Yeah, which do you prefer?
Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.